Oui, Monsieur le Président, j'ai des remarques d'ouverture.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have opening remarks. So thank you for welcoming me to OGGO. It's a pleasure to be back to speak to Bill C-15, the Budget Implementation Act. Budget 2025 addresses a time of profound change for Canada as the world undergoes a series of fundamental shifts. We are rethinking our supply chains and our priorities. Our priorities are changing quickly to respond to economic and security concerns. The world is more unstable and more dangerous. Canada must not stay on the sidelines. We must build a stronger, more resilient economy for the benefit of all Canadians.
Budget, modernizing government, supporting Canadian workers and businesses, and making strategic investments that will shape our future prosperity. Building a strong, sovereign Canada by spending less to invest more in the people who are building this great country. Public Services and Procurement Canada plays a central role in this effort. As the government's common service provider, we touch nearly every aspect of federal operations, from the buildings Canadians rely on, to the technology systems that deliver services, to using the powerful lever of public procurement, leveraging billions in public dollars to scale up our strategic economic industries through our new Buy Canadian policy. Budget 2025 is going to enable PSPC to drive this transformation. Most importantly, we are making ourselves our own best customer through our Buy Canadian policy. Canadians expect this of us, to prioritize spending to build our domestic manufacturing and innovative businesses, strengthen our supply chains, and create good, well-paying jobs for Canadians. This scales up our strategic industries, builds capacity at home, and makes us more competitive internationally. This will in turn open new trade opportunities and diversify our trade relationships. Dans le domaine des achats de la défense, la création de l'agence
procurement, the Defense Procurement Agency is already contributing to moving projects forward more efficiently so that the Canadian Armed Forces receive the equipment they need more quickly. And we are strengthening industrial process in the country. We are modernizing IT systems in the government, and we are broadening the use of AI responsibly to better deliver services, to reduce costs and administrative burden. Bill C-15 also has important amendments to the Canada Post Corporation Act, which reflects this broader modernization plan. It's no secret that Canada Post has major financial problems and is going through an essential transformation time. It is essential that we ensure that the corporation has the revenue it needs to continue operating and to make the necessary investments to continue serving Canadians across the country. A major obstacle is the approval process that is long and rigid for postage rates, the price of a stamp. It requires governor and council approval. This adds bureaucracy and limits Canada Post's capacity to respond to economic changes.
This process, allowing Canada Post to set postage rates while maintaining appropriate oversight and accountability. These changes follow the recommendations of the Industrial Inquiry Commission led by Commissioner William Kaplan, and they are aimed at supporting the long-term financial sustainability of Canada Post. I want, however, to be absolutely clear that these administrative changes do not alter long-standing public service commitments. Free postage for materials used by people who are blind will continue, as it has for more than a century, and reduced postal rates for libraries will remain in place. These important services are not being affected in any way, shape, or form by Bill C-15. In closing, Mr. Chair, Budget 2025 reflects a government that understands the need to adapt and lead in a changing world by modernizing government operations, reducing red tape, and making smart generational investments. We're strengthening Canada's economy and ensuring public institutions remain strong, efficient, and responsive to Canadians. Le projet de loi C-15, Monsieur le Président, est essentiel pour mettre...
Bill C-15 is essential to implement our ambitious necessary plan, and I am pleased to discuss it with colleagues here today.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Mrs. Block, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister Lightbound, Ms. Reza, and Mr. Urechi for coming and joining us today to talk about the amendments to the Canada Post Corporation Act, among other things, because we do have some other questions for you today. I know that you were here in November, at which time Canada Post and PSPC yourselves were in conversations around another loan for Canada Post. At the time, you couldn't tell us very much because you were still in conversations. We understood that they were not in supplementary B estimates, which we were looking at them because the conversations were ongoing. But earlier, I think late last week, it was announced that a decision had been made to approve another loan to Canada Post. How will this funding be authorized?
Oui, ben le financement dont fait état, puis peut-être Lorenzo, si tu veux.
The financing, and Lorenzo, if you want to complement my answer, but a little bit over $1 billion was granted. It's a refundable loan to Canada Post that would allow Canada Post to continue its services, its essential services that Canadians need. Now, it's important to highlight that when we made the announcement in September to modernize and transform Canada Post, it was in recognition of the fact that though we have to support Canada Post as it's facing financial difficulties, it needs to transform itself because this cannot be a long-term solution for the federal government to support it in such a significant way. Lorenzo, I don't know if you'd like to add something there. Thank you, Minister.
So earlier last week, an order in council was posted that indicates that the Minister of Finance had authorized additional funding for Canada Post. This is required under the Canada Post Corporation Act, but the funding will be included in Supplementary Estimates C as part of the annual process. Thank you.
So it is another loan, like the previous $1 billion loan. Are the terms similar for this loan as the previous $1 billion loan?
Si tu veux le prendre, Lorenzo, mais oui. Oui.
Yes.
Will Canadians ever get repaid for the first $1 billion that you approved for Canada Post?
C'est certainement ma volonté
It
la
is
plus
certainly what I most hoped for. When I was appointed minister responsible for Canada Post, I didn't take long to act on the recommendations from Commissioner Kaplan and to ask Canada Post for a plan. This is a corporation that was profitable for a long time, but because of changes I've explained in the past, hasn't been for a good 7 years. It's essential that it finds financial viability once again, and that's certainly my will, that Canada Post would one day be able to generate profits, but also ensure its indispensable mission for Canada. It's a vital institution for the fabric of our nation. I'll stop there. I see you have another question.
It is my understanding that you gave Canada Post 45 days to submit a plan to right-size their operations. So that was 3 months ago that you received that report, 3 months ago, and you have yet to make any sort of announcements about whether or not that's been approved. And I just want to quote from the Auditor General's report of February 9th, 2026, where she states, our latest commentary draws attention to significant, I'm on the wrong paragraph. Also, in our 2025 commentary, we noted that 77% of Crown corporations did not have their corporate plans approved before the start of their fiscal year. This is similar to the rate reported in the 2024 commentary. She also goes on to note delayed approvals can cause operational inefficiencies, project delays, or additional costs. So when we look at the fact that Canada Post provided you with the plan that you required them to give to you 3 months ago, when are you going to make a decision on that plan?
Ben, premièrement, c'est juste qu'on a reçu.
First, we received from Canada Post a transformation plan in November. We've had discussions with Canada Post to receive more information to ensure we have all of the information. That being said, it's clear that when I made the announcement in September, we had lifted the moratoriums on community mailboxes, rural mailboxes. I expect Canada Post to consult communities that will be impacted and start preparing that transformation. That's the message I sent to Canada Post that I'm sending once again today. And that's what Canada Post is working on, to my understanding.
So we know that for between 2019 and 2024, PSPC did not approve Canada Post strategic plan. So for 5 years, their strategic plan was not approved. We now find ourselves in a situation where in September, you provided some, I guess, I'll end it there and I'll come back to that. Thank you.
Thanks. Madame Rochefort.
Oui. Bonjour, Monsieur le Ministre et l'équipe.
Good afternoon, Minister and team.
In your opening remarks, that these changes are administrative in nature. Can you explain the current process for setting stamp rates and how, to some extent, it creates red tape, and especially given that in the this week we've been discussing the Red Tape Reduction Act, and so I'd be interested in your comments on that, and also how much do you expect the timeline to be expedited by giving Canada Post authority to set postage rates independently? And I think you might have touched on that, but if you could just confirm it once more.
Oui, ben merci beaucoup pour la question. Puis, en
Thank you
effet,
very much for the question. That is part of an effort. It's part of the transformation we want to see of Canada Post, but it's part of a broader agenda to reduce bureaucracy and red tape. Specifically with Canada Post, it was one of the recommendations of Commissioner Kaplan, which was supported by the union, or the unions, so that Canada Post has the means to increase, to follow inflation, the cost of delivery as well, the price of stamps. And now, to answer your question, Madame Rochefort, the process is that it will be gazetted. It will go through the Governor and Council. So it can take 3 to 4 months, which is pretty long and laborious. And it starts at the wrong spot. Politically, now it would be Canada Post that would say, based on our operations, here's the increase we propose. It would be in their corporate plan and then approved by Treasury Board. But that process will be much quicker, and it will start in the right place at Canada Post. To give you an idea, 2018 to 2023, there was a 7% increase in the price of stamps in the country. In other jurisdictions that are comparable, it went up about 55%. So that flexibility there and that agility to follow inflation with the price of stamps, that's what we're seeking to change and improve with Canada Post. But with accountability as well, in 2 ways. One is that it will be in their corporate plan. It will be approved by Treasury Board. And also, as Minister, every year I send a letter setting out expectations or intentions with Canada Post to inform them of our priorities. And in that letter, I can instruct them, here's what we're expecting for the price of stamps. Thank you very much.
The matter of maintaining preferential rates and exemptions for libraries and Canadians who are blind. I would just like you to repeat it. In my writing, the issue of libraries has come back, and so just to say it once more, loud and clear, would be very helpful.
Et merci de le soulever. Puis je suis vraiment heureux
Thank you
d'avoir
for raising this. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity here to really clarify the matter once and for all, because this has generated a lot of legitimate fear, because this is a program that many libraries depend on across the country. There are no changes that will affect the price of stamps for libraries or blind people. The program is staying in place. That preferential rate for libraries has existed since 1939, with or without legislative protection, and it will continue to exist with these changes. There are no changes. We understand the importance of this program for libraries, especially in smaller communities. It gives access to a greater network of libraries in a way that makes financial sense. So no changes, and no changes for blind people either. I want to be absolutely clear. Canada Post was clear. We spoke about this, and with blind people, I know it wasn't part of your question, but As I have the floor, Canada has signed an international convention. I don't have the exact name with me. Maybe Lorenzo has it. But in any case, an international convention, I'll find the name a little later. But we've signed that convention, and the protection offered to blind people when it comes to the materials they need in Braille, it has existed since 1888, over 100 years, before there was any legislative protection, and it will continue existing because this is a public policy we feel is important. Canada Post as well, and there will be no changes. I want to reassure your constituents and all Canadians.
Related to small and medium-sized businesses, particularly in rural and remote communities, to learn that they remit annually over $350 million per year in prepaid postage through postage meters. And I learned that metered mail is cheaper to process, improves address accuracy, and helps retain stable, high-volume users in the postal network. And so can you explain how giving Canada Post greater flexibility to design targeted pricing, such as for metered mail, helps retain mail volumes, support rural, small and medium-sized businesses, and protect the long-term viability of Canada Post?
Excellente question. Juste pour revenir sur la
Excellent
présente,
question. It's the Universal Postal Convention. And so the protection for blind people is since 1898. So that's been there for quite some time, and it's there to stay. Regarding your most recent question, the opportunity for Canada Post to determine the price of stamps based on market needs and volume, and to have some predictability for their clients is essential to ensure there's the right volume and that they have the demand they wish. So I think that will help. And it's not for nothing. It was one of the recommendations from Commissioner Kaplan. In a number of regards, it improves things. At Canada Post, there was a lack of predictability for their clients.
Please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome once again. I have a number of questions. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time, but I'm delighted to hear because I've also heard many concerns about libraries, so I hope there will be correspondence rapidly from municipalities. Nobody listens to us, or very few people tune in, so this is news we will need to share. So I salute all those in municipalities who raise this with me. So in the news, there are contracts of contracted delivery. I know the CEO will meet with the Transport Committee tomorrow, will appear there. There are two elements. Cost reduction, but at what price? And are you aware of who is being hired at a time when there are deaths on the road currently? That's a very good question. You won't be surprised to hear that I've taken note of those articles as well, and the Canada Post CEO will appear at Transport tomorrow. But from my perspective, I'm not responsible for Canada Post operations, but I'm the minister responsible. I expect from that Crown Corporation, like all Crown Corporations, that they have the highest standards of integrity, quality, and safety with their suppliers. What Canada Post has told us is that they haven't used contractors that would be in like that Drivers Inc. model. The CEO will be able to appear tomorrow with all of the information, but what I've been told is that they haven't used that type of company. My expectation is that they don't deal with that type of company, and with the Budget Implementation Act, $67 million over 4 years will provide them with the tools and the means to fight that type of company, to identify them, so they can be strict with those who need to be punished. Mr. Chair, at the last meeting we had, I was vigilant about the possible privatization and I was looking at the German model, and so that's one of my concerns. But subcontracting is at a lesser cost, and that's an issue that concerns me. But now let's turn to the restructuring plan. How is it that the CEO and the department don't have the plan yet? There's been all this time. Is there a dichotomy in strategy and intentions? I expected to have news. People are concerned. They wonder if their post office will close. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to tell us when we will have the news. As I mentioned, we received the plan in November. At the time, maybe it was you or someone else, but when I announced the changes at Canada Post, I was told we were going too quickly, and now we're telling me we're taking too long. I think the idea is to find a balance. But in that regard, we received Canada Post's plan. We discussed a lot with them to obtain more information to ensure it's a good plan, because when I announced in September that we were going to transform Canada Post, and I know we agree on this, there are fundamental principles that need to be respected, including that there be services in remote Indigenous communities. This is essential for me, so I want us to land at the right place with Canada Post. There's work that needs to be done by Canada Post for community mailboxes, for example, to start consultations with communities that will be affected. How can that be operationalized? But in the area of transformation, I'd be happy to come back and talk about it more at the right time. It's not because there wasn't a public announcement that no work has been done. There's a lot of work being done with Canada Post to obtain all of the information so we land at the right place. Okay, I have 1 minute left. All right, sandboxes. We met with the office last week for red tape reduction. I have two concerns. The first is conflicts of interest, because there's a structure. How can I state this correctly? So you could be set aside from the ethics commissioner, but in the choices we make, we're told there's no specific practice to ensure that when we make ministerial choices, there's no conflict of interest. So what about having that guardrail? How long do I have, Mr. Chair? 30 seconds. I'm also keeping track of time. 30 seconds? It's a good question regarding the sandbox. I think on the principle, what Bill C-15 seeks to do, Budget 2025 more broadly, is to have a regulatory framework to accelerate innovation, and the sandbox principle is used throughout the world. The European Union has them, and the United Kingdom in the financial sector since 2016, they've had sandboxes like this, regulatory sandboxes, and 700 firms have innovated, improved. There have been billions of dollars in spin-off benefits. So, and we need more flexibility. Now, if there are suggestions regarding proper guardrails and supervision mechanisms, we're open to hearing them.
Généreux.
You're generous. Thank you.
Thank you. So being here, it's great to be able to have an opportunity to ask the minister in regards to red tape reduction. I'm very excited, especially I think in the current situation that we find ourselves, where we are going through the worst bankruptcy rates since the last financial crisis. And actually in BC, bankruptcies are up at 10%. And when I meet small and medium-sized business, I hear things like this. You know, there's too much paperwork, there's slow approvals, there's high compliance costs. They can't afford, and they can't even afford their payroll and rent. So what I'm wondering is if you could explain to me how giving this new exemption, these sandbox exemptions, would make life easier for small and medium-sized businesses.
Oui, ben, d'abord, il faut regarder l'effort de
We need
réduction.
to look at the red tape reduction effort as a whole. If I look at our department,
I'm just hoping we can hear this new exemption. Does it automatically simplify forms for small and medium-sized businesses? I understand it does for big, but how about for small and medium?
Mais c'est parce que vous prenez une mesure dans
you're
le
taking
budget.
one measure from the budget, but there are many others. The effort to reduce paperwork is not limited to the sandbox.
Discretionary one, and so because we see this tragedy happening with bankruptcies, would it automatically shorten approval times for small and medium-sized businesses? I get it that it does it for some of these big guys, but for small and
Mais pas
medium-sized.
seulement, écoutez, moi, ce qu'on
Not
vise,
only, look, what we're trying to do with this is increase the speed of innovation, where sometimes the regulatory framework stalls innovation. One example, it could, depending on the sector. I don't know if it will help my barber, but it could help a small fintech company that wants to accelerate payment systems using digital assets like stablecoin or other.
Is it easier for a larger organization with a legal team to use than it would be for a small, like you say, a startup? Would you require a legal team?
non, ma compréhension, c'est que non, ça peut très bien aider des petites
Our intention is that small startups could innovate, and that's what we've seen in countries that have that type of instrument, regulatory frameworks.
Ben,
Small and
c'est-
medium-sized, the kinds that I have, like 10% of bankruptcy in British Columbia. Will it apply to them?
ben, c'est-à-dire que le principe dont on parle,
The
les
principle we're
bacs à-
talking about, the regulatory sandboxes, if you look at Germany, France, the UK, where it's done, the EU, Brazil, it's not necessarily for one specific sector. It's not for one broad sector. It's sectors where the regulatory framework stalls innovation.
Small and
Ben, je
medium-sized
pense que oui,
businesses.
la réponse c'est oui, ça peut
I think so.
certainement
The
être.
answer is yes. It can certainly help SMEs.
I understand, and I could be wrong, that the only concrete red tape measure in the BIA, red tape reduction measure, is the creation of these exemptions for these big businesses. There's no other one, just that one. The rest is going to be sometime in the future in another budget. We just get this one. When we see bankruptcies at such high levels right now, when we need, small businesses really need some relief, and all we see is just this one, this fancy exemption for big, elite, large companies that are going to be doing who knows what.
Non, pas du tout. Quand on regarde, par
No,
exemple,
not at
les-
all. When we look at SHRED, the tax credits for scientific research and experimental development, I can tell you, you can come to Quebec and see how many SMEs are benefiting from those tax credits. We're simplifying, drastically simplifying.
These fancy exemptions that they put in place.
mais c'est pas le seul. Je veux dire, vous prenez
It's
un
not the only
élément.
one. You're taking one element of a big bill.
Mais,
This brand spanking new one.
regardez les changements
Yes,
qu'on
but
fait.
look at the changes we're making to these tax credits to simplify them for entrepreneurs. And this is the feedback we've received from the Council of Canadian Innovators. They're telling us that we need to change how those tax credits are given to give predictability to businesses and increase the cap.
On le fixe.
Yes, we are fixing it. Yes, yes.
What my concern is these very small companies who really don't have the opportunity to, they don't have legal teams, they don't have all these extra people. You know, a lot of these things that you guys have put forward is productivity that is going to get fixed 15 years from now, right? Like big projects. And I think the fastest way to actually make an impact on our GDP, on our productivity, is exemptions for small and medium-sized businesses so that they can hire tomorrow, not in who knows how many years. It's the middle-class entrepreneur, the small and medium-sized business owner who can make a decision tomorrow to hire someone. And a lot of these things that you're putting forward have nothing to do with these small and medium-sized businesses, like the corner coffee shop. Okay. Thank you.
We're past our time, but it's Mr. Gasparo's round, so if he's kind enough, he may allow some of his time for you to respond, Mr. Minister Lightbound. But I'm not sure Mr. Gasparo is, but the time's yours, sir.
Great, thanks. And you'd be correct. So, Minister, yeah, thank you. So I want to come back to a line of questioning my colleague had referenced, and it was in regards to the Universal Postal Convention. You mentioned in your statement that the preferential rates for libraries have been in place since 1939. There's no plan to change them. You mentioned the no rate postage for for individuals who are blind, and that's been in place since 1898. So is that statutory in nature, or is it through the convention of the Universal Postal Convention that we are maintaining that public policy position?
Par rapport aux personnes aveugles,
Regarding blind people, it's an obligation Canada has under the Universal Postal Convention. As I was explaining, we signed it in 1898. Not necessarily statutory, but it's an obligation we have under a treaty we've been a part of for over 100 years. Regarding libraries, it's statutory, and it has been since 2013. There was a private member's bill that enshrined in law the preferential rate for libraries. Before 2013, libraries, since 1939, they've had that preferential rate from Canada Post to share material between libraries. And even though we're making this change to provide more flexibility to Canada Post to set the price of stamps, it doesn't change anything to these public policies that were there before 2013, since 1939. They will remain. For members, for example, Canadian citizens can send letters and communicate with their representatives free of charge. There's no legislative protection that enshrines that in law, that it's free of charge to write to members of parliament. It's a public policy that's been in place for decades that will remain in place, even though there's not, strictly speaking, statutory protection. I want to be very clear. Those preferential rates have existed for decades, or for MPs, it's free of charge, and it will remain even after the adoption of the Budget Implementation Act.
And there are lobbyists who are calling for domestic statutory protection. It would, I guess, from your perspective, would be redundant because of us signing on to this international obligation and the fact that it's basically been enshrined for decades.
Tout à fait. Et l'enjeu qu'on a.
Exactly. And the issue we have is that when it becomes enshrined in law, it's linked to the process we have that I explained in a previous response, where it had to go through the Governor and Council, be gazetted, and that slow speed that we're trying to eliminate by providing more flexibility to Canada Post. But that flexibility to set the price of stamps doesn't involve any changes to public policies that have governed it for decades. Canada is obligated under the Universal Postal Convention. So for libraries and for blind people, I can't say it enough times. And we've had a lot of communication fairly on this, because this is a service that is essential for many Canadians across the country. And with libraries, it gives access to a broad network for smaller libraries and smaller communities at lesser cost, and blind people can have materials in Braille, which can be rather expensive. So it's very important, and there's nothing that will change with the proposed changes.
Okay. Quickly, have any other stakeholder groups called for changes to the stamp rate process? I know you touched on this a little earlier, but I know obviously the commissioner has, but just remind me again, has anyone else called for this?
La société elle-même le demande depuis un bon moment d'avoir cette.
Canada Post has asked for that flexibility itself for some time. The unions have called for that flexibility because it's essential revenue for Canada Post. If we want to reach financial stability, profitability, or break even for Canada Post. It's one of the points in Commissioner Kaplan's report. The Union and Canada Post agree on this, so it's essential that we go forward with this measure. And I'd highlight in passing that there have been positive developments since the last time I appeared before committee. The Union and Canada Post have agreed they need to ratify the agreement, but the two parties hadn't found common ground for a long time. That's very positive, and that leads to predictability and stability at Canada Post, which was lacking and accelerated the loss of business.
Je vais revenir sur
I'll come back on another gray area. I appreciate you being open to our suggestions, Minister. So, yeah, there's a song I'm thinking of right now. So the gray area is, in terms of the criteria, the main criterion for the regulatory sandboxes is it has to be in the public interest. The question's been asked, what is the definition of public interest? Because that could be qualitative, and there is none. So this could be a concern. The minister can decide alone of the content of the regulatory sandbox, and in terms of independence and control, and it will last for 3 years. What can be done now and not in 3 years say we should have done this? So what of the guardrails? In the public interest, there are sectors. We want to foster innovation in key sectors. You could think of the financial sector could benefit, advanced manufacturing, clean energy. There are good use cases, good examples that could benefit from sandboxes, as we've seen in other countries. Now, regarding guardrails, we need to know that there's a lot of transparency in what's been proposed. There are reports, it goes to Treasury Board, it's published. So it's not opaque. Everything that comes from these sandboxes would be perfectly transparent, and the public could ask questions and see what's happening. So there's transparency there. It's about accelerating innovation. The world is evolving very quickly, and an example that comes to mind that we see elsewhere in the world is that now the finance world is evolving very quickly with new technology, new payment methods, digital assets. The regulatory framework doesn't always allow for innovation. We want to have innovative small businesses testing out new approaches without necessarily needing to invest a lot in regulation before they know if it's a good approach. So this is for my colleagues from all parties as well, Liberals, Conservatives, Bloc, the NDP isn't here, but if you have suggestions to ensure we have the right balance, we're open to that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Minister, can you give us some concrete examples of what you have done to address the concerns you highlighted in your opening statement about we living in a dangerous world, which is true? Tell us about one project that has been started and that actually had a positive impact on Canadians outside of the Ottawa bubble.
Très facilement, dans le budget 2025.
In budget 2025, there's $5 billion for our commercial corridors to increase our capacity to diversify markets, to export to new markets. And in that regard, shortly after the budget, I was there in Saguenay for the second dock to allow the Port of Saguenay to have greater capacity to deal with the materials from the area and further so they can be more competitive, more productive, and it's a boom for the area.
100%.
Exactly this budget
100%. $5 billion for commercial corridors, and I can give you, as an example, I don't have an announcement yet, but I hope that the Port of Quebec City will benefit, as well as a lot of other port and airport infrastructure, maybe in your part of the country as well. That's a very concrete example.
The Gordie Howe Bridge that is in my jurisdiction is currently being threatened by the President of the U.S. I'm not sure what your government is going to do about that, but I'm very disappointed in the lack of negotiations that you have not done to open that bridge. It's been delayed and delayed and delayed. When is that delay going to end? When is that bridge going to open?
Je crois comprendre par
I think I've understood regarding that bridge that the Prime Minister has had a conversation with the President this morning and that the issue will be resolved as quickly as possible in a context that's not always easy, as you know right now.
People in Windsor are looking for a date. They want toll rates. When is that going to be published? Because I've reached out to your department and the transportation sector, and nobody has responded to my emails about those questions. I'm sorry I'm getting loud here, but these are frustrating things for the people of Windsor, and they're not getting the answers they deserve. Why is there a delay? Last year, we were told that the bridge was going to open in the fall of 2025, and now it's early 2026. And yesterday, we heard the comments made by the U.S. President that he's not going to allow it to open. And now you're telling me that the Prime Minister had a conversation. Tell us, give us some concrete timelines as to when this bridge is going to open. Just conversations are not enough. I'm sorry.
Et crier en comité non plus n'est pas suffisant.
Yelling at committee is not enough either, Mr. Gill. It's not an issue that is under my department. That would be the infrastructure department. I'm sure the minister will be pleased to speak to you so you can have all of the information to inform your constituents.
You, sir. My apologies on that part. But as you can imagine, the people of Windsor are very frustrated. They've been told that this bridge is coming and it's going to open soon. And I'm sure part of this procurement process is under your purview. So there has to be some sort of answers that I can bring to the people of Windsor from you and your government to say, this is the exact timeline that we are seeing, and this is when the bridge is going to open.
J'apprécie votre question. Je
I
comprends
appreciate your question. I understand the frustration when there are projects that take longer than planned. It happens with infrastructure that takes longer than expected. I'd like to answer, but I don't have the information. This is not an issue that's under my portfolio. That's from infrastructure. It'll be my pleasure to put you in touch. But when you talked about direct impacts, you were talking about, I can tell you, in the Ile de la Madeleine, there's a landing strip, and those $5 billion, you can talk to any port authority across the country, and they'll tell you that there are major needs for infrastructure. And we are seeking to diversify at unprecedented rates. And I think Canadians understand that it's necessary right now.
That's why I brought up, because you mentioned the infrastructure projects that you have initiated and completed, this project in my city is not being completed. And that's why I brought it up to you, not for any other reason. All right, sir. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Sutz, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister and team, for being with us here today. First, I'd like to pick up on the line of questioning from MP Jensen. We were at that point talking about what she referred to as fancy exemptions in respect to Canada Post, and asking whether there were any other fancy exemptions that would help small and medium-sized businesses within Bill C-15. In my riding, businesses are talking about a lot of the supports that are in the budget that will help them, whether it's the small, medium-sized Office of Procurement that is going to be set up under the Buy Canadian policy, whether that is improving and speeding up on the SR&ED credits, or whether that's the super productivity deduction. So I'm wondering, Minister, if you could speak to some of the examples that you've seen in the budget, similar to the efforts that we're taking with Canada Post, that will help small and medium-sized businesses.
Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Sutz, for the question. Much appreciated, because you've reminded me of something I forgot in my answer earlier. It's true. In our announcement for Buy Canadian, We're really changing the way we do procurement to prioritize Canadian companies and Canadian content. There's a part that's important. The program that's funded in the budget to facilitate access for SMEs to federal procurement, and that's very important. Sometimes it can seem complex to deal with the Government of Canada. We want to simplify the process. We want to give more contracts to SMEs. We want the products of our small businesses to be purchased by different departments, different crown corporations, because often a Government of Canada contract is the best business card for a company as it's trying to expand internationally. I'm very pleased that's coming in the spring. It's funded by the budget. And you also talked about tax credits for scientific research and experimental development. I've heard from many entrepreneurs around me, and you too, I'm sure, because you have a writing that's very innovative. They say the process as it was lacked predictability. It needs to be reviewed. We need to know how much we can invest and what we'd receive and have that uncertainty upstream. That's what Budget 2025 is doing. It's providing approval to an investment upstream rather than having it after the fact. And an increase of 35%, and capital cost allowance 100%. There are many entrepreneurs who are awaiting that. And in my preparation, I looked at reactions we've had to the budget. And for manufacturers and exporters of Quebec, they say they are satisfied to see how important manufacturing is in the budget. We feel that the government wants to prioritize our businesses for our economy and for national security. The measures in the budget meet the priorities of our members, access to contracts and investments for innovation. That's Julie White. From the manufacturers and exporters of Quebec, I could provide many more positive responses from entrepreneurs who are at the root of our economy and innovation.
And I can certainly attest that those items are landing well, and people and businesses in my riding are excited to see these efforts move forward, and look forward to seeing the budget passed for sure. Switching gears slightly, as we were focusing on Canada Post and the streamlining of the rate setting process. Can you speak to what the impact of these changes is expected to be or expected to have on Canada Post's fiscal outlook?
Certainly.
Certainly, it will allow Canada Post to have more predictability in its revenue and to keep up with inflation and delivery costs on a more timely basis than in the past. That's why it was a request. And when you read the Kaplan report, it's clear that the process that existed before the changes we're proposing didn't allow Canada Post to have that predictability to keep up with its comparable companies around the country, around the world.
Mr. Chair, can I correct the record?
Briefly, sure. What's up?
Just something that Ms. Sudd said at the beginning. She said that I was talking about Canada Post when I was actually only talking about red tape reduction. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks. Minister, keeping in mind that comment, I don't know if you want to change anything. Your response may be due in a writing. We're going to suspend in a moment, but before I do, I've got a couple of quick questions, if you don't mind. Will PSPC post any justifications regarding the use of sandbox decisions? Make that public?
Ma compréhension, c'est que dans le processus.
My understanding, in the process that's set out in the law, there's a mechanism to report with Treasury Board. So I'm not sure I've understood your question exactly, but my understanding is that yes, there are reports.
Acting the power, making use of the power given cabinet members to make these decisions under C-15, will those justifications for, like, in the public interest, will they be made public?
Oui.
Yes.
Thanks. Would you consider or would you recommend a sunset clause for these provisions so that we can see, perhaps in a year, how they're working out rather than just giving permanent powers to cabinet?
C'est une suggestion.
It's a suggestion. I'm not ready to commit the government on that right now, but I hear your suggestion, Mr. McCauley.
About need to bypass some of the regulatory framework we have, like enacting the power, making use of the powers from the C-15. Like, why not just fix the regulatory framework? Like, why do we need these powers to bypass the regulatory framework instead of just fixing the framework?
Ben, il peut arriver que dans un usage spécifique, dans
Sometimes, in a specific case for a specific industry, a specific innovation, the regulatory framework doesn't fit. You know, you've been a parliamentarian for a long time.
It doesn't fit because we've heard consultants, we've heard business, we've heard analysts, we've heard everyone talk about the issues around our regulatory system in Canada, how nothing can get built, all the red tape. Why aren't we just fixing that as well? And I understand sometimes the need to bypass, but why aren't we tackling that?
Vous avez tout à fait raison qu'il faut réduire.
You're quite correct. We need to reduce red tape overall and have a regulatory framework that protects Canadians, of course, but also that fosters innovation. And I think we can do both. It doesn't reduce the need or the importance of having that type of regulatory sandbox, just like many other countries have them to foster innovation, to do things much more quickly than a regulatory change would permit.
What metrics are going to be used for, I guess you talked about Buy Canadian, about selection of Buy Canadian, and what metrics are going to use to determine if we're succeeding?
Oui, ben, d'abord, merci de rappeler cette annonce.
Thank you for reminding us of that announcement. It's clear to us that the way we will evaluate the success of our Buy Canadian policy is seeing an increase in Canadian content, Canadian companies obtaining contracts. Now, the issue we had was that there isn't necessarily much visibility for Canadian content. There could be a Canadian supplier, but the content isn't Canadian. So that's what we're changing with the Buy Canadian policy. It's not just a supplier that has an address here in the country. We need to see that the content is made here so that the benefits will be much more visible and will be considered when we grant contracts. So that's what's a big change in the big Buy Canadian policy.
Perhaps to this committee or to the public. The reason I ask, we've looking at for years the issue around Indigenous procurement, and we'd send order of paper questions, and PSBC was response, well, we track it on an Excel spreadsheet. We really don't have that information. How are we going to see if we're actually succeeding in this program? As opposed to it just being more talking points.
Si jamais ma sous-ministre, je sais qu'elle
My
réfléchit.
deputy minister thinks a lot about these issues. And one of the issues we're facing is that visibility wasn't always there with Canadian content in procurement in the past. That will no longer be the case in the future. We'll have that visibility because now that is part of the criteria since December 16th.
We're looking at it from many different lenses, including the KPIs, including what we're going to do to be able to have compliance and measurement around it. As the minister indicated, it's about the Canadian supply chain, about what's manufactured here, what professional services are done here. So it's really being able to look and unpack at the supply chain and to be able to put some key performance indicators and measures against it. So we're ramping up on the policy and trying to build the framework concurrently.
Okay. Well, I'll look forward to some success with that. Being on this committee for years, I recall one study where a very famous comment came from your department, which was about how Canadian IT companies could not get any government contracts. And the answer was, well, no one ever gets fired in the government for hiring IBM, and thus we don't give it to Canadian businesses. And I look forward to actually seeing a change and some success in that area. Anyways, thank you again for being with us. Ms. Reza, Mr. Irachi, it's wonderful to have you with us. We're going to suspend for 5 minutes. We'll try to fix Mr. Lazon, and then we'll welcome our new guests.
Okay, I don't think the second hour is going to go anywhere, to be honest, guys. We can just call it here. But like I said, tomorrow we do have Justice Committee in the afternoon, and I think that will be quite good. I don't see what it's scheduled for 2 hours, but they have gone over those 2 hours before. So I wouldn't be surprised if it goes for 3 hours or whatever. So I will see you guys tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for question period. I hope Carney will be there again, but he's usually only there for 1 day a week and usually picks Tuesday or Wednesday. So we'll see. Anyway, though, guys, I will see you tomorrow. Before I go, thank you, Wee Cookie, for the super chat, and thanks everyone for tuning in and watching. Okay, see you guys. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.